good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, maybe, because we have an international audience. So my name is Ruchi Bhatnagar. I am from Georgia State University, and I'm presenting today teachers' use of social emotional learning in supporting students that were in person and online during the COVID-19 pandemic. So because of the pandemic, teachers have had to deal with unique situations that have never arisen before for them, because they had students, especially in the year 2020, 2021, when we collected our data. Teachers had students that were present inside their classrooms, but simultaneously, also, some of the students chose to remain online. So now teachers were having to deal with these hybrid modalities of teaching. And these unique challenges weren't just limited to how you were teaching students, but they were also social and emotional challenges that because of the context of the pandemic that teachers now had to address. There was an exacerbated sense of isolation, stress, trauma among not just students, but also families and communities. And that led teachers to focus on social emotional learning much more in order to give a holistic support to their students. So the research questions for this study were, what were the strategies that teachers found effective in impacting students' learning and development during this period? What challenges the teachers faced during the pandemic that impacted their effectiveness as teachers? So the participants in this study were 23 teachers who had graduated from our College of Education at Georgia State. And they had been teaching for just 1 or 2 years. So they were all novice teachers. And they were employed in high needs public schools across 6 districts in Georgia, 6 males, 17 females, and a diverse representation, which is reflective of the diverse teacher candidate population in our college. So our college also has a mission for preparing teachers who serve in high need schools, and that's why all of these teachers were employed in high need schools. So our methodology included collecting data through phone interviews, which lasted between 30 to 45 minutes. We used in vivo for data analysis, used constant comparative analysis, and we had a team that was working on coding this data. And then once we had arrived on a code book, collaboratively, we separated out strands from our data, and the strand that I'm presenting on today is the use of social emotional learning in teaching. So for that particular strand, there were 5 major themes that included building a safe learning environment, instruction for social emotional learning and what it looked like in action, then deconstructing the specific learning needs that were created because of the pandemic. Then there was also a whole list of challenges that teachers mentioned and that made them feel like they weren't being effective, especially in these online and hybrid contexts, and then advocating for their students. So the safe learning environment included building those connections with students, relationships, trust, and having a sense of classroom community, even when the classroom was divided. Some were online, some were in person, and constantly communicating high expectations and motivating students to do well. So a big part of that, creating that learning community, was building trust with their students. So they were constantly encouraging their students and wanted to be as role models in students' lives. So they would incorporate things that were really personal to students, like using hip hop terms and using the language that students used, or connecting with students' interests. So like this teacher said, I could trust, so that when teachers did that, students would express that, yeah, I trust this teacher, I can learn from him, teach me. So building that comfort level and trust was really important for teachers to even before they got to teaching. So then another aspect of building a positive classroom community was affirming the students' cultures and identities in a positive way. So teachers had taken the time to learn about students' backgrounds, their identities. And so like these two examples showcase that in when teachers were teaching populations that were speakers of English as a second language, teachers made sure that learning continued to happen even when their English skills were still developing. And the second example, you can see that the teacher was really emphasizing bringing in your own personal background, your identity, your culture in your work. So teachers wanted students to take pride in their culture, and that led to greater engagement and higher quality work that students produced. Student motivation was also very important in this period filled with uncertainty and trauma. So teachers were constantly expressing these positive affirmations to their students. Like this teacher said, I believe in you, why can't you believe it too? And then this teacher mentioned, I put so much faith and belief in them. And if they believe, 90% of the battle is already won. So just creating that confidence and self-esteem in their students that they should have high goals for themselves and they can achieve those goals. So the second theme was instruction for social emotional learning and what went on in their classrooms to emphasize that. So there was enhanced student engagement, allowing collaborative activities, providing context for learning and where you would apply these knowledge and skills, making full use of the interactive technology that was now available to them, and providing extensive modeling and detailed feedback on student work. So when students worked in collaboration, teachers saw that engagement increased, they were able to learn from one another. And this example shows that in order to build a classroom community, this teacher paired students in a buddy system. So one virtual student and one student who was in class, so that they could not only work with each other, but also hold each other accountable and stay abreast with what was expected of the whole classroom. And then they would all feel a part of the whole same community, the same classroom. So because of the pandemic and an increased use of online portals, they also appreciated how some of these portals were very interactive. And these were new and fun ways of learning content. So they mentioned Edpuzzle and Nearpod. So they really appreciated that aspect, that they could engage with the content in a very hands-on way. Then teachers also relied a whole lot on providing modeling and feedback. So in this example, this teacher mentions how they had designated Friday as a tutoring day where students could come in and the teachers would provide them extra inputs. So in terms of modeling for expectations or even providing tutoring for the content. And the second teacher here mentions how they gave detailed comments on all of students' work, because then that would help children know what they had done well and what they needed to do better. So this kind of support was really important. The third theme of learning needs created specifically by the pandemic, there were two kinds of needs here. One was because of the inequities and the learning divide that had created this gap between students who could log in to the online classrooms and could continue learning, but there were students who didn't have access to a device or Wi-Fi, and therefore they were deprived of that. And then teachers mentioned how all of these created a much larger variability in students' current learning situation and their learning needs, that they had to address all of that. So they had to be cognizant of all these gaps or variability in learning needs, and then have to adapt their instruction to address that. And then they also mentioned that, so there were these academic issues because of the digital divide, but then they also had to be aware of all the other emotional needs that had been created by isolation. So students have been home for almost 2 years now, one teacher mentioned. So there are emotional issues, there are social issues. And before we even get to teaching them math or science, we have to also account for these issues so that students can truly feel supported. So teachers also mentioned soft skills. So it's not just that, what is your score on that test, but also focus on, are you engaged in the classroom? Are you volunteering? Are they participating? And then are they able to make connections of content that they learned in the classroom in the outside world? So teachers made room for all those discussions to happen in their classrooms because they felt these soft skills were really important to get students to participate again and be engaged in the classroom activities. So within this, they also mentioned that there was an immense need for flexibility, not just in their own teaching, because they had to account for the academic gaps and also social and emotional needs. But they also mentioned this flexibility was important at the county level or at the state level, because now the states, in this example, the county had relaxed their requirements to give out the tests that they usually give out. So that flexibility was appreciated because teachers could do things that were really meaningful and address the needs of the students. There was also an emphasis on mental health because it was really necessary and important. Teachers mentioned that they did not want to create too much stress and freak students out by giving tests after tests. So some students, some schools also mentioned having mental health Mondays or focusing on nurturance and showing empathy. All of these things became even more important in the context of COVID-19. So the fourth theme was the challenges of teaching for social emotional learning. That first of all, because it was online, students didn't have to switch on their cameras. So in situations where students wouldn't unmute themselves, wouldn't show their face, wouldn't log in, attendance was low, they wouldn't show up to class or not turn in work. In such situations, teachers really felt challenged in being impactful. And then, but they didn't stop advocating. So they emphasized having stronger homeschool connections and constantly messaging or calling parents using various modes like Class Dojo or texting or emailing, so that parents felt informed about what was going on in the classroom. They even reached out to school administration and county officials. So this group of teachers wrote a letter to the superintendent and asking the superintendent to make it a one-on-one district, that one-to-one, meaning every child should have their own device so that they could all participate. And teachers mentioned that it's important for us to speak up and speak out for the sake of our students so that their needs are served well and decisions are made appropriately. So they also mentioned that a part of being an advocate is supporting one another. So they supported each other because they felt when teachers collaboratively worked, it made it more effective and efficient, whether it was supporting each other through their technology skills or building resources or materials to teach in socially and emotionally responsive ways. So overall, this study just showcased how in a hybrid modality where students were both online and in person, teachers were able to help students acquire knowledge, skills, and positive attitudes. And by showing faith in their students, by helping them manage emotions, showing empathy, and building supportive relationships with peers. And they also face challenges, as I just mentioned, because of student absence, low motivation and engagement. But then this was also made much more challenging because half of their class was online and half in person. So the implications from this work show that the teachers, at least in our study, because they were also prepared with that intention in our college, that they did show a sense of collective responsibility to address trauma, anxiety, and mental health issues students faced in the context of COVID-19. And it also shows how important it is to bring in aspects of identity and culture if we need to connect with our students socially and emotionally. Teachers that students can trust will always be more effective as teachers. So also the importance of flexibility in mandates and low stress learning environment in an already high stress world. And then as students have transitioned fully back to in-person classrooms, teachers going forward still have to be cognizant of all the social and academic needs that have originated from 2 years of online learning, and that makes the importance of social emotional learning even more salient for today's context. So thank you all. I'll stop sharing my screen.